Hello guys, welcome to HM Studio. This is the second part of a workshop where we're going to make some materials, do the lighting, and also do some post-production at the end. This is where we left off the file in the first video, and in this one we're going to start with the wooden floor. If you have a look at the reference image, you can see that we have these gaps, little gaps here, and it's always better to have a model instead of a texture. So let's go ahead and add a floor generator modifier to this plane. Let's make like 150 centimeters to 20 centimeters, or maybe a little bit bigger, 25 to 170. Let's make the offset 50. Okay. I don't need that much of extrusion, so let's go with 0.1 and the same amount for the bevel as well. Actually, we need to create some planks for the truss soffit also, so let's go to the perspective view and create a plane while your auto grid is activated, as well as your snap tool, just like that. And let's apply another floor generator modifier. We need to change the direction by 90 degrees, so let's change that. And we don't need any offset. I'm gonna just turn it to 0. Alright, maybe we can just make him a little bit smaller. That's perfect. Let's go to the camera view again, and we can start creating the material. Let's open up the material editor from here, or just by pressing M on your keyboard, and create a Vray material just by clicking on this button right over here in the Vray menu. I need to change my render engine to Vray. Let's hit OK. Okay, and there we have it. Now to give it the diffuse map, we need to create a Vray bitmap. So let's find it in this menu. It's right here. Just drag it into the material editor. And I have the textures right over here. Okay, let's start with this wood material, and I'm going to select the color one. Okay. Let's make a copy by holding Shift on your keyboard and just dragging it and load the other textures. I'm not going to use the displacement, but we're going to use this normal map. Let's make another copy and load the roughness map. Perfect. Since we're using the metal roughness approach, we have to change one setting in the BRDF rollout, and let's just change it to use roughness. And we're getting the roughness here instead of glossiness. Now let's plug all of these textures to their corresponding slot, and we can go from there. But for the normal map, we cannot just plug it to the bump node, and we're gonna have to use the Vray normal map. Let's plug it to here, and now we can use it as our bump map. Now let's change the reflection color to white, since all the materials have the same amount of reflection. Alright. Now we have the material. Let's apply it to the geometry. And now we need to use a UVW map modifier. Let's use the real world map scale. And to randomize these textures on each and every of these planks, we need to use a Vray UVW randomizer. Let's drop it into the scene, and we get lots of options here. But since we're going to randomize it by each element, we're gonna have to use this option right here. Now let's go ahead and select use real world scale and give it a size. I'm gonna go with 150 centimeters on each side. I don't want to randomize the rotation, so I'm going to change this one to 0, and we can keep everything else as they are. Now we can just plug it into every Vray bitmap that we created earlier. I think it looks fine. Now we can go ahead and create a plaster material for the walls. If you have a look at the reference image, you can see that this wall is a little bit darker than the ceiling, so we're gonna have to create two materials. For that, we have to detach this part of the wall from the rest of it. So let's select these two polygons and just simply detach them from here. Okay. Now let's open up the material editor and create a Vray material by clicking on this button right over here. And we can create a darker material. Put this wall over here. Let's hit OK. I'm gonna make the reflections white, as we did previously for the other material. And for the reflection glossiness, I'm going to use a Vray bitmap. Let's load it from here. And here is the texture. This is how it looks. Okay, to make it darker, since the material is actually really glossy right now, we're gonna have to use a color correction node. So let's just drop it to the material editor like this and go to the advanced mode and reduce the gamma value down to, I don't know, 0.2 or 0.1 to get some randomization in the reflections. Maybe 0.2 is better. Okay, I'm going to reduce the glossiness value down to 0.5, and in the maps rollout, I'm going to reduce this number down to 50. And this tells Vray how much it should use from this texture and how much it should use from this value that we have up here. And we can just find a balance between the two. So by making it 50, we're telling Vray to use 50% from the texture and 50% from the value that we have up there. Maybe we can just reduce it a little bit more. Yeah, I guess 20 is a good number. Alright, let's apply this to this wall and apply a UVW map modifier. I'm going with 300 centimeters. Okay, great. Now we need to make a copy out of this material that we created. We're gonna use the same maps, so we don't need to copy them. We're just gonna have to copy the material. Let's just make it a little bit brighter. I'm going with 190. And yeah, that's good. Let's apply this to the ceiling and also the other walls. And I'm going to copy the UVW map that I created for this wall, and I'm just gonna apply it to the other geometries. Great. Actually, for these lures outside, we can use the same material that we created for the floor. So let's select all of them and just apply this material to everything. We need another UVW map modifier, so let's go ahead and add one. Box mapping mode, real world scale, and we need to rotate it. Alright, that's great. Let's check the sides. Yeah, everything seems to be okay. Now for these soffits up here, we need to create another material. So let's go ahead and create another Vray material, like so. And we need to load the textures as we did before for the other materials. And for this one, I'm gonna go with this texture. Let's plug it to the diffuse map. But the colors are a little bit different and we need to use a color correction node. Let's find it up here and just drop it right there. Okay. I'm gonna just reduce the saturation a little bit. Go to the advanced mode, maybe make it a little bit darker. And we can just change the hue to get more or less the same result. Okay. Alright, that's good enough. Let's change the reflections to white. And we're not going to use a reflection glossiness texture here. So let's just reduce this number to something like this. Okay, great. Now to randomize it on every plank, we need to use another UVW map randomizer. Let's just drop it into the material editor. We're going by element. And I'm not going to randomize the rotation, but we need to give it its size. Let's go with 150. Now let's apply a UVW map and make it a real world map size. But I think we need to rotate it by 90 degrees. I'm gonna just disable it to see the texture. Yeah, actually we need to rotate it by 90 degrees. Great. Now let's create a concrete material for the floor. And as we did before, we're going to create a Vray material by clicking on this button right over here. And just bring in the textures with loading Vray bitmap, and the textures are right here. This is ambient occlusion. I'm going to use these two for the diffuse map. So let's go ahead with the color first. And to use the ambient occlusion, we need a composite map. Let's drop it into the material editor. Plug this one to the first layer. And let's create another layer. And we can make a copy of the texture and load the ambient occlusion. Let's plug it to the second layer and change the blending mode to multiply. Okay, great. It gives a little bit of more details to the texture. Let's plug it to the diffuse map and we can go ahead and load the other textures. So let's make a copy out of this texture as we did for the previous materials and load the other textures. I'm not going to use the displacement, but let's use the normal map. And as I told you before, we need a Vray normal map. Let's plug it to the first one and use it as the bump node. Now we need another copy for the glossiness or the roughness map. Okay. And let's go to the VRDF rollout and use roughness and just plug it to this slot right here. We still need to turn the reflections to white, and there we have the material. Okay, I'm gonna just apply it to this geometry over here, and now we need a UVW map modifier. Let's go with 300 centimeters. Okay, that's perfect. I'm gonna just scale it up a little bit so it fits. And that's it. Alright, for this part over here, we need a gravel material. So we need to create another Vray material. And this time we're gonna go from here. Vray MTL. And we're gonna just load the textures as we did before. Here are the textures. Let's go with the color. Another composite map. Let's plug this to the first layer, make a copy and load the ambient occlusion. We need another layer, so let's create one and plug it to the second layer. Okay. Multiply. And let's plug it to the diffuse map. Now let's change the reflections to white and load the other textures. Let's go with the roughness map and just plug it to the roughness slot. Alright. Now let's apply it to the geometry and we're going to use a UVW map for this as well. I think 100 by 100 is a good number. Okay, for this one we need to use a Vray displacement modifier. Let's select the geometry, go to the modifier list and just apply one from here. We're going with the 2D mapping and we just need to feed it the texture. Let's make a copy out of this one and load the displacement map. And just simply plug it to this part over here. I think 1 centimeter is actually a good number. And for these cylinders over here, we need to make a metal material. I'm going to create another Vray material. And from the presets, we can actually go, I think we can go with the iron material. Yeah, I think that looks good. Let's apply it and that's it. For this part of the ceiling, I'm actually going to use the same plaster material that we created for the walls, and it can work just perfectly. Actually, for this geometry as well. Let's just copy this UVW map modifier and just apply it to these other geometries. Alright, perfect. Now we just need to make some copies out of this tree behind the window, just like what we have in the reference image. But since it's a high poly geometry, we need to convert it to a proxy. So let's go to the Vray menu and let's select Vray Mesh Export and just turn it into a proxy. Now we can just make a few copies based on our camera view. Okay, let's make an instance and we can just randomize them by size and rotation. They look good. Now we can finally start the lighting process. If you have a look at the reference image, you can see that we don't have any direct sunlight coming inside the room and it's only coming from the environment light. But anyways, we're going to use the sun and sky approach. Before starting that, I'm going to make a few adjustments. I'm always using this layout, like one on the right. I'm going to lock it on the camera in the render settings just by clicking on this lock button over here. Now let's make some adjustments. In the V-Ray tab, let's use bucket, 24 for min shading rate and 10 for max octaves. I'm also going to add some of the render elements. Let's go with the back to beauty. We need denoiser and light mix also. Right there. Okay. Now let's go to the top view and start by creating a V-Ray sun in the scene. You can find it right here. Let's just click, drag and drop it. We're going to use the V-Ray sky for the environment map, so let's say yes. And let's just move the sun up to right around here. Okay, great. Now let's run the render to see what we have already. Alright, I think we're already kind of there, but let's disable the noiser for now. And this plant over here is a little bit annoying. I'm just gonna get rid of it. Let's just select it and hit delete on the keyboard. Alright. I see that I forgot to get rid of these gaps between the planks. Let's go ahead and fix that too. I'm going to select this geometry. In the modify tab, we need to select the floor generator and turn the grid length to 0. Perfect. I'm gonna just change the sunlight direction. Maybe we can get some more light inside. We definitely don't want to go this way because we're gonna get the sun inside, but I think somewhere around here is fine. Okay, let's add an exposure. We're gonna have to reduce the highlight burns and maybe a little bit of more exposure in the scene. Okay, as you can see, this color is a bit different than the reference image. And to change it, let's open up the material editor. Let's select the material and we can just pick the color from the reference. If you just select this eyedropper and click anywhere here and just drag your mouse on your reference, you can just pick that color. I think it should be a little bit brighter though. That's good enough. For the next step, we can add a couple of V-Ray lights for these desk lamps. So let's go to the top view and create a desk light from here. The bigger it is, the softer the shadows will be. I'm going to just make it this big. Now let's just put it right over here. Okay, great. And I'm gonna make a copy for the other one. Let's make them instance. Great. Now we need to change the color and directionality. This number is 0 by default. I'm gonna just turn it back to 0. We don't need any directionality here. And for the color, I'm going with the temperature. So let's change it to temperature. And let's go with something between 4000 to 4500. A little bit of more intensity. Alright, cool. As you can see, this carpet that I have here is a little bit bigger than what we have in the reference image, and we don't get these nice highlights on the wooden floor. So I'm just going to scale it down this way and maybe make it bigger in the other direction. Let's move it down, and yeah, I think that's okay. Perfect. Now we can see the highlights from the lamp, and we don't get the highlights from the sky anymore. Not as much anyways. If we compare this wooden floor to what we have in the reference, it should be a little bit more glossier. And to do that, let's select the material, and in the roughness map, we're gonna have to add a color correction node. Just like that. And we can make it a little bit darker by decreasing the gamma value. If we were working with the glossiness, it should have been brighter to make it glossier, like the opposite. But in this method, we need to make it darker, and I'm going with 0.8. Actually, we can increase the highlights a little bit more by selecting the light, going to the Modify tab, and increasing the effect specular. Let's make it a little bit more glossier, maybe 0.7. I think that's good enough, but let's increase the effect specular a little bit more. Much better. It seems that something is wrong with this material for the soffit. Let's have a double check. Let's just go ahead and select it and pick the material. Yeah, it's the wrong material. It's actually concrete right now. Let's go ahead and select this material and apply it to the object. Alright, now it's working. It actually looks too saturated, and we can just decrease the saturation from this color correction node that we created earlier. Let's try the gamma as well. No, it's too dark. Okay. That's much better. At this point, we can actually add a little bit of bloom to the scene, and it will make it more interesting. Let's just play with these adjustments to see what can work the best for us. I think that's good enough, but we still need to render the scene with the higher resolution so we could see everything better. And afterwards, we need to adjust some stuff here in the frame buffer, and when we're done we can start the post-production. So I'm gonna just increase the size from here. I'm going with 2500, and we can continue when the render is done. Alright, the render is done and we can start adjusting some more stuff. If we compare it to the reference image that we have, it still looks a bit darker, and we can fix that by increasing the environment light. So let's select the light mix from here and increase the environment light until we get a better result. .5 seems to be okay. Now you see that we have all of these burns happening everywhere. To fix that, firstly I'm going to disable the lens effects. Now let's go to the exposure and decrease the highlight burns a little bit more. Maybe all the way down. Okay, now let's add a filmic tone map and give it a little bit of contrast. Usually power curve works the best since you have a lot of control over everything. We need more contrast to simulate these darker areas over here. And I think it's more or less working. Let's make it a bit brighter. Now we can bring back the lens effects, and we need to adjust it again. So I'm going to increase the bloom effect all the way up to 1. Let's decrease the intensity. And also the size. That's alright. I think we need to make the image a little bit colder also, so let's add a white balance. Just make it a little bit colder, like so. Less exposure. Alright. I usually don't like it when the image is super smooth. We always need a little bit of noise in the scene to make it more realistic. And for that, we can just bring down the opacity on the noiser. I like it this way. Alright, now let's increase the intensity of these lights and make them a bit warmer. Okay. That's much better. Okay, we're done here. Now we can start doing some post-production. To do that, you can go to the image menu and copy the current channel into the clipboard, and in Photoshop, create a new file by pressing Ctrl N and just paste the copied image by pressing Ctrl V. Now let's convert it to a smart object and apply a camera raw filter. Here you can find all the adjustments that you need. So let's give it a little bit of clarity. Okay, maybe a bit more of contrast. The exposure seems to be fine, but we can make it a bit warmer by this slider over here. Let's go with 2. Okay, going to bring down the highlights a bit. And also the shadows. We can make it a little bit more saturated with the vibrance. And from the HSL adjustments, let's increase the luminance of green, yellows, and oranges. By the way, if you like this tutorial, it would be awesome if you sub to the channel so you don't miss my other tutorials. Alright, let's adjust the hues also on oranges and yellows, and that would be all for this. If you also want the project files, you can find them on my Patreon, and the link is in the descriptions down below. Okay, that's all we had to do for this image. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions for this tutorial, just let me know in the comment section and I'll try to come back to you as soon as I can. Thank you everybody for watching the whole video, and I'll see you in the next one.